Hi everyone, FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos here, and today we're going to take a look at some more viewer questions. They keep coming, so I'll keep answering them. I don't want to do that every week, but these are some really good questions, so I don't mind kind of doing a back-to-back on that topic. So the first one I think I'll look at is from King Hunter, and okay, he asks, basically wants to know after the following moves with black, so let me flip this around here. What to do in this position, or more specifically, he says the following. I checked the database and couldn't find a single game after knight c6 with bishop takes c6, and figures there's got to be some way to handle this position. And in fact, during the game, he was worried that, okay, white would play bishop c6, bc6, and then the backward c pawn. So this guy seems to be a little bit loose, and also is afraid maybe a knight would come in and colonize the c5 square, and for this reason he decided to play knight to d7 in his game. Whatever happened I don't know, but at any rate that was his concern. So the question is, well, how should black play against knight to c6 or knight c6, bishop takes c6? Well, in fact, there are actually many games with this, so I'm surprised you didn't find it in your database. Maybe it was a very small database. At any rate, I had no trouble finding lots of games with this, and typical play goes like this: bc6, and okay, white can sometimes castles here, but generally the knight goes to d2 first, then white plays h3, and okay, here black can play f6. So after ef, for example, black is going to have pretty good counterplay. You might even just play rook takes f6 actually after e takes f6. So I don't know. Actually, yeah, no, you got to play e takes f6 after this. So it's much more sound, I think. And the black knight will go to f5 or f7, and then to d6 and to e4. So actually, here white usually plays something like rook to e1 is the more common move. At any rate, this position isn't really so dangerous for black. I want to talk about the main move instead. So I had a little bit more I wanted to say about this. So knight b to d2 straight away. And now black doesn't usually play knight h6 here, but plays e6. Okay, so castles, knight e7, and again h3. And you'll notice that white's not even trying to put the knight on c5. And really there's a reason for it. It's that he just doesn't have enough time to do it. And black is going to whip up some good counterplay with f6 quickly. So for example, let's suppose white plays knight to b3. Okay, knight f5. And now, of course, if knight c5, we just play bishop takes f3, and if queen f3, knight takes d4. So white has a couple of options that seem reasonable here. So one is just to play h3, takes. Now black has c5, and that solves the problem right away, because on knight takes c5, we have knight takes d4, so no problem there. And if instead d takes c5, then the e5 pawn is hanging. So either way, black seems to me to be in perfectly good shape. Maybe a more interesting try is bishop to e3. So we take care of the d4 pawn, so if bishop f3, queen f3, we don't have to worry about c5. We can just play knight takes c5 then, because the d pawn is already protected. And knight takes e3 would be fine. It would be at least pretty decent for white. No real worries there about the doubled pawns. In fact, the f-file could be as much of an asset as the doubled e-pawns are a debit. So, black castles, rook c1. So this looks like the kind of thing that King Hunter was worried about, but it turns out that black is actually doing just fine here. So queen to b6, and of course knight c5 is no good now because the b2 pawn is going to hang. So let's say h3, takes, and now another typical part of black's strategy in the modern, in these variations where white plays a quick e5, is f6. So we just break this this central configuration apart, and after ef6, bishop f6, black is going to have good pressure against the d4 pawn. The queen is also very nicely placed, putting some pressure on the b file. Maybe a5, a4 is going to come in. There's also possible pressure against, well, on the f file too. So I think black is doing quite well here. It's probably at least equal. Okay, so going back to this position after knight to e7, white generally plays h3, takes, castles, and alright, we have a position where it's just a normal position. Maybe white still has some chances for an edge, but black is basically doing fine. The c-pawn is very easily defended. In fact, the knight on e7 is a great defender. The f6 idea is always a possibility. Black has c5 possibilities. There's also play on the b file. So again, when this bishop comes out, queen to b6 is possible. Okay, if bishop to g5, obviously we have to take care of the knight first in some way, but the basic idea is queen b6, and either white ends up tying a major piece down, or if he ever plays b3, then a5, a4 is in the air. Of course, there's also always c5 too, if that's not directly stopped. So with all of these ideas, you can see that black is able to exert a lot of pressure. Black can exert pressure against e5 with f6, against d4 with a knight on f5, with c5 with queen b6, and also with his dark square bishop if f6 and a pawn exchange has taken place, and against b2. So all of these possible targets are enough, I think, for black to maintain a very good position. And black's results have actually been quite good here. I think he scored 50% in the games in the databases, generally featuring pretty reasonable players. So it's not club players or children under 6 years old, but games featuring even good professionals. So, for instance, you might want to look up a game between Chuchalov, who was 2603 Grandmaster, and Hrachik, who's 2578, who won with black in a game that's was played in Germany in 2004. Okay, so I hope that helps with King Hunter's dilemmas in this opening. Okay, next we move to questions from Nucleus, who has a couple of questions in the Ruy Lopez. So, from here we have two questions. So let's start with the Marshall one first, just to get it out of the way. So the Marshall, for players who play the Ruy with white, they're happy to get it out of the way. So let's do that here too. Okay, so castles. Of course, the Marshall is c3, d5, and Nuke has noticed, of course, that white often plays h3 as an anti-Marshall, but he wants to know, well, why does this stop the Marshall? How does this stop it? Why can't black just do the same thing? d5 and takes, and here, again, just like in a regular Marshall, play either c6 or the old-fashioned knight to f6. What's the difference? What's the problem? Well, black can play it. Black has played it, so it's certainly not impossible. But it's not thought that this is really fully up to snuff here for black. And it's not that black is losing, but the white has increased options here. So playing h3 is very often useful in the Marshall. This is not generally a move that white regrets. And c3, on the other hand, though, is a move that is not especially useful for white. It takes away the c3 square from his knight, for one thing, and it just doesn't really have any relevance at all to anything else that's going on in the Marshall. So it doesn't help with white's queenside play with a4, for instance, and it doesn't help to shore up any weak defensive points. In fact, it might even weaken the d3 square in some positions. Okay, not too many, but the point is just that c3 is not an asset in the Marshall, because it just gives up a tempo for no specially useful purpose, and because it takes away c3 from the knight. So I won't say anything about c6. I mean, you can look this up. Again, white can play either d4 or d3. But I will mention, for instance, a funny little trappy line in knight f6. So, okay, d4 might be best, but d3 is fine too. It's been played by some very strong players. And now, okay, bishop to d6, rook e1, and now probably bishop to b7 is black's best, and I think he's got some generic compensation just because his pieces are all very nicely developed. But quite a few players have tried knight to g4, trying to play like a typical Marshall gambit. Well, against this, white has a very convincing refutation. So queen f3, hitting the rook. Okay, queen h4. Again, very much like the old-fashioned Marshall. But now, okay, instead of, well, you don't take, obviously, But white has at least two very good moves. Both have led to wins. So there's rook to e4, which certainly isn't bad. But even stronger, simply rook to e8 is winning. Black is just pretty much dead here. The threat is simply queen takes f7. Obviously the rook isn't protecting it because it's pinned. And then queen to g8 is mating, or rook takes f8. And it's not so easy to find an intelligent defense for black. In fact, there really isn't one anymore. If bishop to d7, just rook takes a8 is a free rook. Rook takes e8 is still getting mated. Queen takes f7, queen takes e8 check, queen takes f8 mate. And, what else is there? Bishop to b7. Okay, on that, if nothing else, white has rook takes f8 check, followed by queen takes g4, and he's simply up a piece and a pawn for nothing. So the basic answer is black can try to play a Marshall Gambit after h3, but it's going to be a favorable one for white. I will point out, though, that after h3, bishop to b7, d3, now d5 has been popular the last couple of years. It's been known for a long time, but there's been kind of a real wave of popularity that this move and this gambit has been riding since sometime in 2007. So takes, knight to d4, and there's quite a bit of theory on this now. So you might want to do a little research before you play it. But this can be played by black, and so far at least the results have been pretty reasonable. So yeah, it may turn out that h3 doesn't really avoid the Marshall Gambit, but it does avoid it right away. So black should at least do it like this, at least assuming that this holds up, and it looks like it quite possibly will. Okay, so going back now to the non-Marshall question. So d6, c3, castles, h3. And now Nuke asks, well, why play h3? If it's to stop bishop to g4, then why didn't black do it last move? Well, the answer is that it's not that we're trying to stop bishop to g4 in a position like this, but rather that we want to play the move, white wants to play the move d4. And if he plays d4 straight away, now bishop to g4 is a pain in the neck. Okay, white can't play this. It's called the Yates variation. It's a real line. It's important. It has its own fairly considerably developed theory. But anyway, the basic point is that the bishop on g4 is now pretty good because there's quite a bit of pressure against the pawn on d4. And so white is forced to do one of two things, both of which have some small drawbacks. So one is to play d5, and while this is, again, it's playable, but it's also very quickly shutting down the long diagonal for this bishop on b3. So knight a5, bishop c2, c6, h3, bishop c8, takes, queen c7. Okay, anyway, this is all well-established theory. And the basic point for black is that while he's losing a little time with his bishop, white also is a little bit frustrated with this bishop on c2. And anyway, generally speaking, black's results in the Yates are a little bit better than they are in the in the non-Yates, in the 9h3 variations. The other move, okay, instead of d5, is to play bishop to e3. Okay, and here e takes d4, cd4, knight a5, bishop c2, and now either c5 or knight to c4. And again, black is quite active, and the bishop on e3 is again a little bit of a detriment. I mean, it's kind of a clumsy square for the piece. In some lines, it blocks the support of the e4 pawn, and in fact here, bishop to c1 is the normal move. So again, the Yates is perfectly playable, but generally speaking, white prefers to just prevent this pin and then play d4 the next move. So if white could play d4 without having to worry about bishop to g4, then yeah, h3 would be a bit of a silly move. And also, I should say that bishop to g4 here is not considered especially worrisome because there isn't any pressure being placed on white. So white will just play d3 and do the old knight swing, which we talked about last time, I believe, or h3 and then knight to g3. So probably knight b to d2. Can actually tie this together with not only last week but also with the last question. So knight b to d2 first, then h3, and only after the bishop commits maybe then knight f1 and knight to g3 to further harass the bishop. At any rate, because there's not going to be any pressure against the e-pawn if the bishop retreats to g6, this is actually considered to be quite comfortable for white. So I don't know if I would say it's a clear advantage. That's probably too much, but definitely an edge. Okay, so I hope that's helpful. And now we move on to our third questioner, and that's Frenchie, who first asks not so much about this position, but about some lines that he or she, not sure which it is, about some videos and other sources that the questioner has seen. So Frenchie asks the following. Okay, so question one is a question of trust. I don't know how to word it simply, quoting him or her, but have you ever had problems with studying analysis, not just on openings, and then reading or seeing contradicting advice from the same author on the same subject? I'd like to be naive and say that the authors / presenters are honest and have made new discoveries, but is this really the case? What is your professional opinion on the subject? Whenever I decide a change to my repertoire is needed, I will study an opening video first to get a flavor for the positions, etc., then take them to games. However, I've been studying a video from Andrew Martin from the Foxy series of videos on the 2 knight f6 Scandinavian. It's an old video from the mid-90s, and since then he's produced a video refuting all previous analysis on the lines, which he himself advocated. The main problem lies with the Jadul Gambit after what you see before you. Well, this is the Jadul Gambit, and then f3, which he refers to as the best move. Well, I generally think that most authors or video presenters do tend to be honest, and frankly, a lot has happened since the mid-90s. I mean, that's a long, long time ago, not just in terms of the number of moves, but also in terms of computing power as well, and people's access to material. So it's, I would say, definitely a long, long time. I mean, I wouldn't blame anybody for changing their opinion about an opening, especially one that's a little bit on the edge, like this variation of the Scandinavian. 10 to 12 years later. I mean, that doesn't seem a problem. But okay, on the general statement, I tend to think that most authors, again, are honest. The main kind of dishonesty, I think, that there is with the typical opening book writer, and I think generally most people are a bit aware of it and try to minimize it, is, let's say, a bit of excessive enthusiasm for the side they're presenting. So you'll sometimes find comments to the effect that, okay, and black has play, or with a fun position, things of this sort, which sometimes can be euphemisms for my side really is in trouble or doesn't have really enough compensation for the material, but hey, you might get lucky in a practical game because it's messy. So that kind of thing, I think, does happen from time to time. And, be aware of it. Some authors are more susceptible to it than others. But as far as the initial point that maybe raised your worries, that I don't think is an issue at all. I mean, the Jadul and the 3 lines, the Icelandic Gambit and the Jadul, and I forget what the other one was, they were all kind of new and in flux, and there were some really interesting ideas that were kind of popping up then. And sure, after more than a decade with lots of games testing and practice, and high-powered computers and so on, it's not at all surprising that old evaluations have been overturned. Okay, and then Frenchie had another question, and this one was about the London system. So here's what Frenchie asks on this one. So the London system. Perhaps an opening you will not have played too much in your career, if at all, judging by your style. In your opinion, how would you feel is best to attempt to equalize as black against the first 4 London system moves d4, knight f3, bishop to f4, and e3? All DVDs focusing on the white side are far too optimistic about white's opening being a success, and I don't trust that every black line is inferior, as seems to be suggested in DVDs. And he mentions that he's seen DVDs by Davis and Martin. Is this something you've ever played against before? If so, how did you react to it? Because I've heard a lot of players say they hate playing against this system. Well, yeah, I mean, I sort of joke sometimes about the London system that the people who play it are more or less just preparing for their own death. It's like sometimes Miami is called God's waiting room because you'll have these rich retirees from New York. They'll retire and they'll move to Miami. So I think the London system for many people is just something that you play when you've sort of given up on life and the prospect of learning new things and taking risks. All right, now that's kind of cheap and a little bit over the top. I think there's an element of truth to it, but it's going a bit too far. But still, there are people who play it because they just want to be very, very safe and kind of gum their opponents to death and try to just take no risks at all. Well, that's one half. And there are other people who like it because it's just a very, very easy thing to play. You just put all your pieces on the standard squares, and then you play h3, and the bishop goes to e2, and you play c3 and castle and so on, and hope to get some kind of play on maybe a square like e5. Anyway, I think it's nothing too serious, but because it's very, very solid, it does annoy black players from time to time because there's no really easy way to create imbalances. I mean, you've got to take some risks, and even then, white can keep it pretty boring if he's really determined to. I would agree with you that white should not get an advantage with this, and I would say there are a few sources you can look at in confirmation of this. So one is the Tal Memorial Blitz tournament, not this year, which is going on as of the time I'm recording this, and not last year's, but 2007, because I remember that both Gadakamsky and I think his first name is Boris Grachev, Grachev, excuse me, were playing this constantly. I think Grachev did last year too, and you'll find many games in which they were quite successfully neutralized. So check that out. I'll also mention and show you here in a minute a very recent game played between Ivanchuk and Carlsen from the Tal Memorial, from the real tournament, not the Blitz. And Carlsen drew with black with no real problem. And it wasn't because Carlsen was some super genius in the game. He just made very natural moves, played one system of many, and had no real difficulties against it. However, that said, there are two more things that I want to say before I look at that game, or at least the first part of that game. So first of all, if you're really interested or worried about it, then you should try to check out the D-Pawn Specials section of chesspublishing.com, because Eric Prier, who's the GM in charge of that, has basically turned that section into almost nothing but his personal love affair with the London system for the past couple of years. So you'll find a lot of really fine points discussed in it, and probably if you look at the forum of that site, you'll find some interesting discussions. That's probably overkill for most of the people you're going to face. The other thing that I wanted to say about this, or maybe two things that I want to say about this, is first of all, you should be aware of possible transpositions to the Barry, and that's where white plays knight to c3 rather than e3 c3. Also, you'll want to try to find a system against the London that fits with your opening repertoire. I mean, if you're a d5 player, then what I'm going to show you isn't going to work. So then I would say do a little bit more research, check out those games from the Tal Memorial Blitz tournament in 2007, and go shopping around there. But if you're a player who likes to fianchetto your king bishop, then the following will be just fine for you. Okay, so this, and I guess I'll flip it around here, is the beginning of Ivanchuk Carlsen, as I said, from about a week or so ago in the Tal Memorial, 2009. Okay, so all of this is super standard stuff, and now b6. Okay, black's idea obviously is to fianchetto this bishop, and not just to b7, but to a6 to swap it off. Though sometimes you can play to b7 too. But anyway, a4, okay, c5, c3, and now bishop a6. Okay, white castled. Black saw no reason to help white develop. And also bringing the queen over to b7 is useful because it fills in the gaps. I mean, so if you're swapping the light squared bishops, then there are going to be some little holes in black's structure over there. So this fianchetto puts it on a very good square. It's got a nice open diagonal, and it covers up any potential weaknesses that could arise over there. Okay, rook e1, queen b7. Black doesn't mind if white takes on a6. He'll take with the knight and then play knight c7, and the knight can go from there to either e6 or d5. Okay, so bishop to b5 is an attempt to prevent black from developing the knight in that way, but it doesn't really work. Just plays a6, takes, and okay, now a little tactic that takes care of all the problems. Knight a6. So if queen takes b6, this is no problem at all. We just play rook to b8. Oops. And then we're going to take on b2. So no worries there. So white played bishop to h2, queen to b7, knight b to d2, knight to c7. Position's equal, and black had no trouble whatsoever in drawing the position. So, that's the problem, or a problem. I mean, it is difficult to beat the London system. I mean, you just have to slowly but surely outplay your opponent. But, that's true in a lot of openings. I mean, generally speaking in chess, if white wants to keep it boring, there's usually a way to do it. But, first things first. I mean, it's not bad to equalize first and then try to grind your opponent down after that. And if you're a better player, there's still enough play in this position where you could do it. Okay, well, I hope this is helpful and covered some, I think, very interesting questions that I enjoyed thinking about and in at least the case of the Lenin system, doing a little research on. So, and also the Marshall with 8d5. So I had to look up at least a little something. So I knew that the general point that it was h3 was much more useful than c3 with respect to facing the Marshall, but I didn't know about this little trap. So that was kind of a neat point. You flip that around. Yeah, this variation I didn't know about. So that was kind of fun discovering that. Anyway, thanks a lot, everybody, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.